Isn't it as simple as just adding a private checkbox somewhere to say, like, when you start a match, like, this is going to be private. This is not going to show up in the live games, and anyone trying to view it's just going to get an error.
Well, we could do that. I mean, there's a bunch of questions. Like, what if one person sets it to private and the other person doesn't? Whose side do we fall on? What if all the pros set themselves to private and then there's no pro games to watch? Like, I don't know. And is it really worth that much anyway? Because your opponent's still going to figure out what you did.
Or could be Twitch streaming it.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, maybe people will make bots to like crawl those games and even pull their replay codes. And if people start doing that, we may have to not display the replay codes after the live games. But on the other hand, I actually think we're going to go in the reverse direction, and we will probably just make available the replay codes of top live games, because some people, they may not always want to watch a game that's live, or they may want to watch it from the very beginning, from the first turn, and they don't want to turn in on sort of turn 3 or 4. They don't want to tune in, rather. So we may have a list of replays, today's fresh top replays that you can just sort of what I want to say, that you could just like view and go through and explore and see what the top players are playing. And so, it's the opposite side of privacy. It's too bad. You're a top player, your games are now on display. I don't know. Like, if there are people in the community who really think this is a horrible idea, I don't think anybody has ever complained that they don't want to be in the top live games. And I think especially in the top players, they all want Prismata to grow and succeed, so they're more than willing to give up their privacy for a feature that helps the game grow and succeed. So in general, the community has been pretty supportive. But, if it pisses anybody off, then we can try and find a way around that.
I think that's a good approach. You have some potential options if that does come up, but for right now, people are pretty positive. But I mean, I really like being able to just steal replay codes left and right, and then have a nice collection of games that I can study at any time, rather than be like, well, I hope there's some Twitch stream live or something I can try and figure out how to play from.
Yeah, I'm not really clear what the player base is really doing with regards to that. Like, in some games like League of Legends, people watch League of Legends as much as they play it. And in fact, there are many people who never play the game at all and just watch it. Or maybe they used to play it and now they just watch it. And watching a game has become such an important part of the community surrounding a game and the whole aspect of making a game that we really want to enable it in whatever way we can, whether it's through the Twitch or the replays or the live games or whatever. Yeah, it's definitely a big feature we care about a lot.
I think it's interesting when tied with the analyzer, because it gives you the opportunity to play out these sort of what ifs, like what if he hadn't done that in that play. And obviously you can't then automatically simulate the other player, but it lets you kind of play around with it a little bit, because obviously this is not like chess where you can just take out a chessboard and the chess notation and recreate the game. You kind of have to have a computer involved. So providing the tools for people to be able to kind of study games, I think it was an interesting step forward in saying this game is a serious game, not just some congregate demo, that you guys want to get people to a professional level.
Yeah, well, I think we'll probably add the analyzer in a week or less than a week. It wasn't that hard to add. It was mostly just something that we wanted personally to analyze our own games. It was in there fairly early, and we just kept it, and people always told us that it was great to have, so we kept supporting it, and it's still there. And now people request features, can I have the little UI pop-up that shows me how many gold I'm going to have next turn in the analyzer, pretty please? So we'll do that one. It seems to be quite requested. But yeah, like I actually wonder why other games don't have it, because it wasn't that difficult to implement. It's not really difficult to maintain. I mean, like a game like League of Legends, and how huge League of Legends is, they still don't really have a replayer. Like, there are sort of third-party solutions that kind of work, but like they don't have a way to view replays. And to me, that's just insane, because we added replays with so little effort. And it's literally just, your game is based on events that go through the network and get recorded on the server. All you have to do is play those events back. Like it's not that hard. But somehow their infrastructure has made it impossible for them to do, or so costly to do, that they've never even tried to attempt bringing that feature out. And it's just such a shame, because I feel like it adds so much value for so little cost. At least to me, I tend to think most programming things are not that hard.
That's a good thing for someone who actually does programming on the game to think that, when they can actually pull that off.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Programming is one of these things that can be death by 1,000 paper cuts if you're just fixing a lot of bugs and constantly maintaining stuff instead of moving forward. But, I don't know if you were around for this, but last October we did this 30-hour live stream where we coded tournaments in 30 hours from scratch, including designs and everything. And we each worked on different parts of it. And, by the end, we held a tournament. And we, in fact, invited pro players to the tournament in the tournament mode, which didn't exist yet, sort of as to up the stakes. And, we streamed the whole thing, and it worked, and it was awesome. And then we had tournaments in Prismata, and basically nobody used them. And, they had some bugs, but they also, they had some usability issues that needed to be rethought. But we learned a lot from the experience, and when we sort of bring out events later this year, when we have sort of weekend tourneys or actual real tournaments in Prismata, then we will know a whole lot more about how we're going to do them. And the fact that we got it working, and people did play a real Swiss tourney at the end of this thing. And there was live updated leaderboards, and it would send you messages when your game was about to begin, and the games would start automatically, and the pairings, all that stuff. It all happened. It's not rocket science to create features that people really care about and really like. And I always bring up that Twitch stream link as an example. But the thing I want to do most as a software developer is make the most useful feature sort of in the least amount of time, and that's what we try to do.
What do you guys think about the fact that there's so many tournaments being run on a game that's in essentially private alpha?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm both surprised and not surprised. Back sort of a little over 2 years ago, when we first started showing it to people outside of our own group of founders, they all wanted to have tournaments. They wanted to have, invite everybody over and have a tournament in person at somebody's house, and we did it a few times. And so for players that are hyper competitive, I think tourneys are sort of obvious. At the same time, releasing a game to the public and have people we've never met fall in love with the game to the point that they start forming communities and tourneys and doing all this stuff. I've never done this before. This is literally the first game we've ever tried to publish or take live. And so it's a new experience, and it's really pretty awesome. When you see people excited about this game as we are, and we've been working on it for 5 years, but to suddenly have all these people to share our excitement with is wonderful.
I think it's interesting too to see the teams kind of form, in a game with such a small player base.
That blew my mind when I first saw that on Reddit. I'm like, what? We have clans now? Seriously? That's awesome.
I almost think it's funny when some of the players that are at the top of the leaderboard aren't part of one at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's nothing on the line yet. We need to have some kind of clan tourney.
Yeah, I was discussing that with in the interview that I published yet with Crash, where they're talking about there's a little bit of rivalry between Granular Gaming and Vanguard, for example. And just trying to kind of bring that out in the interviews, but it's interesting that they still play each other in these tournaments, but they're not necessarily trying to organize a team-based tournament yet, because the teams are a little spread out. They have different amounts of members and things like that. But it's been interesting talking to the people on a team level about their teams and how they support each other and work together, and even when they're being a little rivalrous, they still are kind of having fun with each other. So I think it's been kind of healthy for an alpha game at this point to already be fostering those different tribal forms of community as well as a more global one.
Yeah, well, I think Prismata is a game where, not necessarily math and calculations, but knowledge about strategies and what works and what doesn't tends to win you games. You know, if you're more experienced, you know what to do in certain situations, you're going to win games. And I think that communicating with other strong players about your games, reviewing your replays with them and trying to find mistakes, you know, sharing your secret opening books with other players, I think there's a whole lot of you know, it's not a zero-sum game. Two players working together who are both strong can probably improve faster than the same two players not working together. So I think it's natural that in a competitive scenario where players want to improve, then they've started working with one another, and the strong players have gravitated toward forming groups that share information about how to play the game. And you know, it's in that sense, it's obvious that teams have formed. You know, in a game that people need to study and get good at, that's competitive, it seems that teams will naturally form. But it's still really humbling and exciting to see it happen.
When the game's going more towards live and bringing in new players, are you considering having like some mentor systems where some of these professional players, or you know, like having starter teams or some way for new players to kind of join the community and get some mentorship early on, outside of just, you know, the built-in campaigns and things like that?
Community stuff like that is always hard because, like, new players are sort of notoriously bad at organizing communities. So you would need more experienced players to kind of act as leaders of communities. But at the same time, well, experienced players don't necessarily want to, like, babysit noobs or you know, teach players. So I think there needs to be something in it for the experienced players, and maybe it's just like having an audience. You know, maybe just, you know, having an audience on Twitch or whatever is what's necessary, and we will see communities form around the supporters of players who are, you know, who stream a lot basically, or who are charismatic, and they don't even have to be the best player. They just have to be somebody who consistently streams and is interesting and is good enough that beginners can learn from. And, you know, you don't have to be 2,000 for beginners to be able to learn from you. You could be 1,600 and beginners can still learn a tremendous amount from you. So, I don't know. As for whether or not we'll see, like, one-on-one mentorship, like, we thought of trying to add modes where mentorship would be facilitated. And we couldn't really think of any ideas that made a lot of sense. And we sort of think that, like, you know, people have Skype, they have chat. You know, it might not necessarily be on us to provide those tools. And sort of like the way we approach things as a company is often we wait and see the direction that the community goes. And if we see something that we can do that will facilitate something that the community is begging for, then we'll do it. Like if we see the community building replay databases, then maybe we should just like leak all the codes of all the top games, because like why not if they're doing it already? You know, it's like you want to wait until your customer is screaming for a feature and then you know it's the right feature to put in, you know, just sort of as a general philosophy. So I don't know, mentorship has not really come up as something that we desperately need, but at the same time we're looking for anything that we can possibly do for new players. So, you know, we're looking for any ideas basically.
Maybe you guys could even just then promote like Twitch streams or YouTube videos or stuff that, you know, from the community, you know, from top players that are doing stuff to contribute back that way, in a sense that they also get to benefit from that because they get a little bit of minor celebrity status from you guys promoting what they're doing.
Yeah, well, I think one thing we'll eventually do is we will have like a news page in the front instead of the current just, you know, changelog on the front page when you go in. And we can have a featured player of the week. We can have a, you know, community post or Reddit post or stuff like that. You know, we could, you know, have a person on our team who is, you know, whose job is to put that community stuff there all the time, right? You know, right now we try and communicate with our community mostly in ways that help us move forward as a company. We're not necessarily trying to serve the community. We're mostly just trying to answer the questions that we need in order to design the game we want. But eventually that will transition more into a role of like actual community management and interacting with the community and maintaining it and building it. So in the future you'll see more stuff like that. Whereas right now we're mostly just like feedback, 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 everything feedback.
Well, I'm hoping then that something like Prismata Frontline can be something that kind of fills that community hole, since you guys are focused on the development, to like be able to do those things to promote the players and things like that. I've noticed just from the analytics alone, the amount of interest from players in other players versus strategy or videos or how-to or articles has been interesting, like way higher to read an interview with a pro player than just to learn how to play the game better. So there's definitely a lot of like interest from the players in that. So maybe that's something that fan sites like that one can help facilitate, so that you guys can just kind of work with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's I think one thing that happens in a lot of in video games in general is that companies, yeah, they do PR, but they're often focusing on just providing the tools for their communities to themselves provide all of this content. The companies aren't necessarily the content creators. And sometimes, for the point of view of the consumer, it's better because you're not being force fed some crap that, Sony or whoever is force feeding you. You're reading the postings or the article of somebody you trust or somebody in the community that you care about, and it's better that way. It's better content. It's voiced in a better way, and we can facilitate that in certain ways. But I think ultimately the content creators for Prismata will be the community more than it will be us.
Well, that's good. I mean, you guys have definitely been good about providing the tools for that in terms of like the replay systems and things like that. You mentioned the replay database thing earlier. I assume you mean like because you actually saw the replay database stuff that was starting to be posted on Reddit?
Yeah, well, there's a number of people who have been talking to me about replay databases or been working on systems of like pulling replays together. There's a site where you can type in a replay and it will pull data from it and, tell you your rating and tell you other information. There's the stuff on your site. There's a bunch of things that are all coming together, and the only warning we ever give to people is we're probably going to change the format of replay soon. All of your shit's going to break. We're sorry in advance. But at some point, we'll probably be a bit more forthcoming, and we'll at least post some top replays or maybe today's top replays or something like that in the game. So we'll see.
So you have the top replays button already in the game, right? The one that says in development.
Yeah, I think it's grayed out.
Yeah, that one and the favorites are both in there, but grayed out with the in development tooltip. How are you planning on determining like top replays?
Well, so for every replay, we can look at the ratings of the two players in the game. We could take the min or we could take the average. It doesn't really matter. But, essentially, given any time period, we can query for all, games in which at least one player's rating was above this or the average was above this or whatever. Like any such query, we can return a list of replays and populate that list, say, sorted by most recent or something like that. Like, there's a zillion ways we could do it, and all of those ways will satisfy the needs of a player who just wants to find something to watch right now that's good. So, the actual implementation is not that important.
Is it just kind of on the back burner at the moment then?
Well, it's probably not even that hard to do. It's probably like a weekend project. Right now, everything's about all the arena rewards and the mini games and skins and emotes and stuff like that. I think once that project is done, we will have a lot more time to sort of focus on quality of life features. But all the new player stuff is sort of the next big project, and I think there's probably about 5 or 6 components to it. But I think the big ones are like being able to play bots on the ladder and like actually rank up for it, having a good casual mode. Having a good tutorial, having a new user quest system that unlocks different aspects of the game as you start to play for the first time and level up, having a progression system where you get rewarded every time you play a certain number of games, all that new user stuff. That is the next big project, and stuff like top replays kind of gets lumped in there because it's a useful feature for learning the game and for new players to have some additional content to explore. So it'll get done.
So in the content that you're going to add for the new player stuff, are you planning to keep the existing like puzzle campaign stuff you have and just repurpose it into more of a like an actual single player adventure sort of thing, or are you planning
Well,
on
so there's going to be two stages to this. Okay, so the tutorial that I'm talking about for new players that'll go out later this year, I don't know if it will have all the narrative stuff in it. Like we do have the full storyline and we have the script and we have all the art for the characters and stuff like that. So we could have the full narrative in, but we may just have the tutorial missions without the narrative or with sort of a more limited small bits of in-game dialogue and sort of pointy-clicky tutorials. The actual tutorials themselves were mostly done last summer, although they need to be revamped in a lot of ways. But like, we have a thing that says click here to get money from your drones, and it has a little animation of a mouse clicking down and sliding across the drones to sort of communicate the fact that you got to swipe stuff. And we did a lot of user testing on it. We got new users, got them to play through these missions, and there were so many problems and we had so many iterations and we went over and over and over and over again. And it's kind of been on the back burner for a little while because we've been focusing on rewards, but we're going to be getting back to it soon. And meanwhile, the storyline is mostly finished. The art for the single player is mostly finished. The planning for the missions for single player is, there may be a few changes, but it's kind of there. The single player content is it's getting. Well, the early missions there are versions of them that we think are good, but there's probably going to be a lot of changes. The later missions are kind of half done, or some of them are done, some of them are kind of just shells of ideas. Like the sort of overall state of that. The thing is that the content creation for single player actually isn't the roadblock. There are much bigger roadblocks in terms of like getting the balances of units right. Because, let me put it this way. Say I make a single-player mission, and then we, nerf the unit that's in the mission. That's really annoying, because either we have to have a different version in the mission than on the server, or we have to, rebalance the mission and figure it out again. So, for a while we were making missions and trying to finally balance them and sort of crafting puzzles with solutions. And, I have an old puzzle from maybe last year that I think is a completely brilliant Prismata puzzle. But it has a Sia Thernax and a Centurion that have both been nerfed since then. So it's like, I could post it online and people would have a laugh because it's now impossible with the current pricing. So of course, I could reinstate the old pricing just for the puzzle. But now I think with most of the units we're more confident that they're not going to change. And if they do change, then we can deal with it in other ways. And we're also making two versions of every mission because they all have sort of the easy version that anybody can pass, and they have the impossible or challenging version that is more difficult to pass and is actually a difficult puzzle or is sort of made as tight as we could possibly make it. So so much content, so much stuff is coming, and a lot of it's kind of half done, but we'll hopefully have more to show later. And I think we will do episodic releases. So there will be a tutorial which maybe has no narrative, and then sometime a bit later we'll have a full first chapter of the game or first two chapters of the game with narrative, and hopefully it'll be reasonably well put together and it'll seem like a compelling single-player experience. And then after that we'll release a couple chapters at a time until we have it out. And I really hope we get to that by sort of late summer, but we'll see.
Are you planning on making the single-player content have some multiplayer components intermixed so that players are, as part of their single-player experience, are expected to play multiplayer or simulation of multiplayer against the bot?
There will be some single-player missions that do feel like a 6 drones versus 7 drones scenario. There will be some that don't, but we do want to get people accustomed to the sort of standard, you start with drones and engineers type of thing. I think a reasonable comparison is the single player from RTS games or something like StarCraft, where the missions aren't exactly the same as a 1v1 multiplayer game. Like there might be some kind of special constraints or mission objectives or some little twist in every mission. But at the same time, the missions are kind of like scenarios. It's kind of like playing regular Prismata. It feels like regular Prismata. And through playing it, you will sort of not necessarily get exposed to every single unit, but you'll at least get exposed to all of the major abilities and strategies and choices that you can make, that sort of thing.
So I know StarCraft had a challenge with that where they ended up introducing, if I remember correctly, challenges in StarCraft to try and introduce players to some more of the multiplayer concepts that they wouldn't necessarily get from the single-player campaign. Are you trying to do something along those lines, or just integrate more of those concepts like into the single-player campaign itself?
Yeah, so those concepts were kind of weird because it was maybe just like an individual. The challenge is like you have these units, your opponent has these, and you have to micromanage very carefully in order to win. And I think the difference between that and regular StarCraft or a sort of regular mission is in the regular mission, like a lot of them you could just like take your hero and beat the mission with it. Or you could just build up a base and take as long as you want and then take your units and slaughter the enemy. And in Prismata, that's less true. The distinction between like playing correctly in a 1v1 sense versus playing correctly in a mission sense is not as wide. So I don't think it's going to feel like two different modes. It's just going to feel like in the campaign there are some missions that are a bit more econ focused. There are some that are really just like micromanagement or almost like chess, mate in two type of puzzles. And there will be stuff that's in between. But I think it'll all be in one campaign and it'll all kind of flow.
Okay. And so you were going to talk about, you said you were going to introduce episodic content, and you mentioned before that maybe that might be something that might cost money or like some way of integrating that as a part of the business model?
Yeah, well, I think so we're going to have a free campaign. And I think for a game like Prismata, where if people play it for a few hours, they tend to get really addictive, it seems like having a free campaign is the way to go. Now, the free campaign, its length is something like 40 missions. Now, right now, you may look and go, oh, aren't there already 40 missions? Is that going to be the free campaign? And the answer is no. It's going to be a lot more in-depth than what we currently have because the missions are bigger and longer. Some of them have multiple phases or stages or different sort of integrated puzzles in one mission. And there will also be like a hard version of every mission. So it'll be more content there than what's there right now by quite a lot. Like right now we have like a Velkar and a Velkar Gold, and that's sort of going to be on the level of what one Prismata mission would be. But anyways, what was the question?
Well, what will the business model be for the other?
Oh yeah, the business model. Right. So so we could have bonus chapters, and I think there's two different directions that we're going to try. One is we're going to have bonus missions that have all of the narrative, and they have dialogue with the characters and all that stuff, and they actually have single-player content. And then we're just going to have puzzles, and the puzzles will be void of any narrative other than, hey, here's a challenge for you. And I guess we're just going to see what works well, what people like, what they pay for. And, if people are like, these puzzles are awesome, I want to convert all of the contents of my wallet into more of them, then we will make more of them. If people really like the story stuff, the single player, then we'll do more of that. I guess we'll kind of wait and see.
I can tell you from experience on the game that I worked on, because we had a good writer, there was actually a large number of players that played just for the story, which surprised me in a game that's just a CCG, where like half the story is told on flavor text of the cards, and then the other part in like level introductions. But it was really surprising the amount of people that were really just into that.
Yeah, I think so. We have a writer as well, and he's really good. He's also really funny, which has completely changed the sort of tone that we have with the game, and we do all kinds of like lampshading and clever jokes about all the shit in the game that doesn't make sense. And I think it's going to make the single player experience really entertaining and compelling. It's going to increase the number of people who sort of play for a mission or two and then stick around for the whole thing. And I mean, I hope it goes well. I think it will. And if people really like it and they want more of it, then we'll ship them more of it.
Definitely end each episode on a cliffhanger then, right?
Yeah, something like that. We have some of the boss missions planned out, and we kind of we try to think of ourselves, what are the most interesting, most epic things that we could put in a mission that will really blow people's mind. And so early on we thought, suppose you only know about walls and tarsiers and shadow thanks and drones, and that's like your understanding of Prismata. Your understanding of Prismata is like, make big defenders, make big attackers, don't let them die. So probably early on we'll have some Amparilla mission that will be crazy, and your opponent will have like a shit ton of defense, and you'll be able to like get a lot of tarsiers, get a bunch of Amparillas, and attack for like 50 or something like that. It'll be great.